Hello everyone, in this video I'll be doing a tier list of all the Baldur's Gate 3 classes. Now I've been debating this for a while on which classes belong in the S tier, A tier, etc. And I've done a lot of testing with tons of different builds, so you can go check those out on my channel if you're curious for some different builds. But we're starting off here with the Bard, which I believe is one of the best classes in Baldur's Gate 3. What makes the Bard an S tier class is the fact that it has two very distinct ways you can go around building it. You can go with a lore Bard, which is mostly focused around like casting. You get magical secrets, which allows you to pick 4 spells from all the different spells in the games, which allows you some really interesting build variability. My favorite is a sword bard, which I believe to be one of the most powerful classes in the game. And in fact, it actually makes the paladin much more powerful. If you have 2 levels of paladin to get smites and then take 10 levels of the bard, you're able to do a whole bunch of damage, and I find it's even stronger than just the straight up paladin. So there's lots of interesting builds for the bard as well. You get proficiency in a lot of different things, and you get to choose that all. So it's really great if you're the face of the party. It's a damage dealer, it's a crowd control, and it does have some healing, allows you to have an extra short rest. It's very powerful, and you should definitely have a Bard on your team. It does sound like it isn't a very strong class, but Bard is fantastic. You can even, once you get up to level 12, take 11 levels of Bard and then 1 level of like Paladin or Cleric to get heavy armor too if you're worried about your damage, but very good class, dexterity bound. I'm putting that up in the S tier, which is just fantastic. Next, we got the Barbarian, which it's a pretty great class, but I think that some of the strongest builds for the Barbarian are more so focused on throwing. So there is some really great throw builds for the Barbarian. For this video, I'm going to be focusing mostly on level 12, going full in on one class. This has a lot of good multi-classes. Like you can multi-classes with Fighter and Rogue, and it's a fantastic multi-class. But on its own, the Barbarian just feels like it's lacking something that other classes get. So it uses unarmored defense, which adds your Constitution modifier and your Dexterity modifier to your armor class. So it can give you some pretty decent armor class numbers, but I still feel like the Fighter is just a little bit better in terms of what it can do. And then the Fighter also has some different subclasses, which allows it to output much more damage. A Barbarian is still a great class, and a fun one for sure. Raging is a lot of fun, but you're kind of limited to sticking with the Berserker if you want it to be the absolute best version of the Barbarian. So that's why it's going in the B tier. Next, we have the Warlock, which is quite an interesting class as well. It has some unique... It's a caster. It uses Charisma for its stat, but it's more so focused on like close range combat versus like a sorcerer or a wizard. So the Warlock, role-playing wise, you signed a contract with your otherworldly being, and they give you powers. So Pact of the Blade is pretty great. It allows you to use your charisma to be your attack rolls, and that increases your overall hit chance, which is nice. But I find the Warlock is kind of outclassed by Sorcerer and the Wizard as far as casting goes, and even maybe the Druid. The Druid's got a lot of really great abilities too. So for the Warlock, I think I'm going to put this in the B tier. Now, I love the Warlock. My first ever playthrough was a Paladin Warlock, which is a great multi-class, but I'm just talking about going straight 12 levels in, and I feel like this just missing something. It does have Life Drinker at max level, which is nice, but still just feels like there should be something else added on to the Warlock to make it a little bit stronger in Baldur's Gate 3 compared to the other casters, because in terms of overall damage output, if you have Create Water, a Sorcerer, Wizard, or Druid is going to out-damage your Warlock every time. So that's why I'm putting in the B tier. Still love the class. Next, we get the Cleric, which I think this... I've seen stats that this is the least played class in the game. The Cleric is... While being the least played class, is probably because of Shadowheart's popularity, but I do think it is also an S tier class. And I'm going to get into why. So I did say this is all for level 12 going all the way in, but a 1 level dip in War Cleric is probably one of the best 1 level dips that you can get outside of like... Even I would say it's even better to Fighter, because you get a lot of spells, you get spell slots, but you also get heavy armor if you choose the Tempest, the War Domain, or the Life Domain. So not only is a 1 level dip good, but you get Spirit Guardians, which is one of the best concentrations in the game. It literally turns you into Beyblade that can just rip through people, and it's got a lot of damage too. Despite being a healing class, it's actually very strong offensively, and you can Create Water at level 1. My favorite multi-class is actually the Tempest Cleric with the Storm Sorcerer or the Draconic Sorcerer. Massive amounts of damage. But as far as level 12 go, this has heavy armor. It has decent enough weapon choice. You get shields, and you get just great utility spells overall, and you can even summon in a otherworldly being to help out your team. So it has some of the best summons in the game, some of the best damage if you multi-class it. And I think this is just a fantastic class. So Cleric goes in the S tier. Some people may not agree, but in the action economy of Baldur's Gate 3, your Cleric shouldn't be healing most of the time. Heals are for outside of battle. The Cleric is more so for just straight up damage, and if you need a heal, it's got it, but you're more so better off doing damage. Next, we got the Druid, which I think is one of the best tanks in the game. Not a lot of people are showing Druid some love, but playing out all three of the subclasses, the Circle of the Land is a caster. It's somewhat similar to like a wizard or a cleric or a sorcerer. The Circle of the Moon is the shapeshifter, which is what I think to be the best tank in the game, because you get the wild shape, which you can give yourself temporary health points, and then after that's depleted, you go back to your normal self and you can do it again and get more health. So I do think that the Moon Druid is probably the best tank in the game, but my favorite class is actually the Spore Druid. Now the Spore Druid is a summoner. It is somewhat like a necromancer, but you get a whole lot of great options for damage. There's some great armor for all types of druids, and I do think that this is probably one of the most underrated classes, so I'm putting the Druid in the A tier. I think it's just a fantastic class. You get 2 druids throughout your playthrough as well as companions, so don't be afraid to use them. They're actually quite powerful, and don't be afraid to respec them either. They have a lot of utility and just overall damage as well. Next, we got the Fighter. The Fighter, I thought my first ever playthrough was S tier, because you get 3 attacks to level 11, you get heavy armor, you get any weapon choice, you get constitution, proficiency, and saving throws. I think that the Fighter is a definite A tier. It could be S tier, but a full 12 levels of Fighter just feels like it is kind of missing something as well. I said that about the Barbarian, but the Fighter as well. At level 11, you do get all your you get your 3 attacks, which no other class gets 3 attacks. Outside of a martial class paired with a Warlock in the Pact of the Blade, because this will give you an extra attack, up to 3 attacks at level 10, which is faster than the Fighter gets it, I might add. But the only thing is, the Fighter does have some lack of skills, I would say. You mainly just have if you go with the Battle Master, this alleviates it a bit. You do get some different maneuvers that you can do, but I like the Fighter a lot. I think it's a great class for beginners, especially because it's just an easy one. You just go in and you fight. But in terms of the hierarchy of damage, magic is probably number 1 in terms of damage. Ranged options are number 2, so handheld crossbows, and then 3 is getting in close and fighting. So I think because of that, it's a little bit lower than some of the other classes here. Next, we got the Monk, and I think that the Monk is actually a fantastic class that does not get enough love. I want to put it in the S tier because it does have like open hand Monk with 3 levels of Thief or Rogue Thief to get the extra bonus action, so you can do it like literally like 10 punches in a row. Is fantastic. I am going to put it at the top of the A tier though. It is a great class overall. Open hand Monk allows you to get in there, and you can use bonus actions for your open hand attacks, so you can get in, do a lot of damage, especially if you have multiple bonus actions. This is a good candidate for haste as well. And on top of that, I'll use your chi points to be able to attack as well. So you can do a lot of damage. You can knock enemies prone. It's a lot of fun to jump around or fly around because you have so much mobility as a monk. And I don't see a lot of people talking about the monk or playing as monks compared to other classes, but I do think it's one of the better ones out there because a lot of variability to it. Open hand monk being the best, but also the Way of the Four Elements monk is a great monk as well. So that's a good one too, but I do think that the open hand monk, 9 levels of open hand monk with 3 levels of rogue thief is just crazy. But even a full 12 levels of open hand monk is very powerful. So yeah, top of the A tier. I think it's a little bit better than fighter in my opinion. Next we got the Paladin. This is my first class. What's nice about the Paladin is you get a lot of roleplay options in this game. Paladins are very tanky. They get lots of they get heavy armor. They get lots of utility spells. Depending on your oath, you can get different spells from that. My favorite is the Oath of Vengeance, which is going to give you Hold Person and Misty Step, 2 of my favorite spells. Hold Person is super underrated, and just getting it for choosing the class is fantastic. It's a crowd control. So you got all of that. You got increased damage to the undead. You can turn undead. The Paladin pairs well with the Cleric as well. And actually, something very interesting is if you multi-class a Paladin with a Cleric, you actually get unique dialogue options depending on the deity that you chose as a Cleric. So if you're a Cleric of tier and you're a Paladin as well, you'll get dialogue options as Paladin of tier, which is super cool. So Very nice to multi-class. My very first, as I said, was Paladin. 5 levels of Paladin to get the extra attack, and then 7 levels of Warlock. So that's 3 attacks. You can cast Fireball. You can cast Scorching Rays. You have lots of damage options between these two. But even a full 12 levels of Paladin's fantastic because you get the auras, which can protect your party. And this is not even to mention the Oathbreaker Paladin, which I'm a big fan of. You can turn the undead with that class. It's a very powerful class. Now, it is a half caster, so that does make it a little bit less good than like some other classes here in terms of like the spells that you can cast, because you're only going to get level 3 spells with a full 12 in Paladin, whereas the Bard is a full spellcaster, so you get level 6 spells, and the same with Cleric. So the Paladin is a little bit cut short there, but it makes up for it with smites. I didn't even talk about smites, which are the number one thing you want to do as a Paladin. As I mentioned with the Bard, the Paladin can do a smite with flourishes, which is very powerful. So the Bard Paladin is actually a very powerful multi-class. 2 levels of Paladin to get Divine Smite, the Searing Smite, and all the other smites, and then alongside that adding in the Bard to be able to do flourishes. It's broken. I think it's one of the strongest multi-classes, but even 12 levels of Paladin is fantastic. Next, we got the Ranger, which I love the Ranger. This is a class that I tried to get to make good, but unfortunately with the Ranger, its best way of using it is the Gloomstalker Ranger, taking maybe around 6 levels of that and multi-classing it. The Gloomstalker Ranger is very front-heavy in terms of the feats and abilities that you're getting, compared to the Hunter Ranger and the Beastmaster, which get their best abilities at level 11. So you basically have to go all in on them. The thing is, though, the Ranger does get heavy armor, so it is decent. Like, you can get heavy armor relatively easy. You literally get it at level 1. Which makes it nice. Ranged weapons are good. The Hunter has a lot of damage with his barrage attacks. The Beastmaster has you can summon in a bear, and then that bear can summon in another bear. So it's nice for tankiness in certain ways, but I do feel like that it kind of is missing out on some of the things that other classes get. It also has spells, which is kind of interesting, but I have a lot of fun with the Ranger, but I just feel like the other classes just do it a little bit better in terms of just the damage output. Next, we got the Rogue, which Astarion is fantastic, but I think that the Rogue it's good, but the Bard does what the Rogue does, but better, if I'm being full honest. The proficiencies, the Bard gets the same things that the Rogue gets. The only thing that I see, I multi-class with the Rogue a lot because it does have, at level 3, the Rogue Thief will give you an extra bonus action, and bonus actions are actually quite strong. If you're a sorcerer, you can cast a spell with that. If you're a monk, you can punch with that. If you're a barbarian, you can throw with that. So this actually multi-classes very well. If this was a guide on going with multi-classes, this would be a lot higher, but as we're talking about level 12s, the Rogue just has stuff that is missing in terms of the other classes, so I want to put that in the C tier. Next, we got the Sorcerer, which is a very, very fun class, and my second playthrough, I went with the Sorcerer. I think that the Sorcerer is the strongest class in the game. The Bard is fantastic, don't get me wrong, but I think that the Sorcerer is just stronger. It has more Nova damage potential because you can quicken your spells. The meta magic's what makes this so powerful. So you can cast, if you have someone to create water, you can cast with this. If you have the Marco Heschker staff, you can increase your, if you choose the Draconic Sorcerer, you get increased damage of whatever element type. So if you choose lightning, you're going to get increased amount of damage. With Marco Heschker, the staff, you also get that, and free casts of Chain Lightning, which is the best lightning damage in the game. So if your Cleric set up water, which you can do outside of combat, and create a large area of water, which is going to double your damage, you can go in with Chain Lightning, which can do upwards of 160 damage, and you can cast that twice. So in terms of burst damage, the Sorcerer is by far the best. People say that the Sorcerer is a very complex class. I disagree. I think that this is more straightforward than playing a Wizard, for example, and definitely more straightforward than a Warlock. The Sorcerer is a blaster. You're in there to deal damage. That is the main function of that. You also got things like Cone of Cold, which is another great damaging spell that's doubled off of Create Water. So Sorcerer, I think, is definitely S tier, and you can multi-class. What I said earlier, multi-classing this with the Cleric to be able to create water yourself. You could play the whole game with just like 4 sorcerers that are multi-class with Cleric to get heavy armor and deal damage. It's actually busted. I think that the Sorcerer is by far the best, just due to how Baldur's Gate 3 is set up with being able to create water outside of combat. It doesn't always translate over to Dungeons and Dragons, so if there's anyone watching this that's a big D&D fan, it's a lot better in Baldur's Gate 3. I could talk for hours about the Sorcerer, so we're going to move on to the final one here, which is the Wizard. Wizards are fantastic. They're able to learn the most amount of spells out of any class. You can swap them out outside of combat really easily. You can learn them from scrolls. There's only a few scrolls that you can't learn spells from, like Counterspell, which they learn themselves, and they get Counterspell. It's probably one of the best users of Counterspell because they have so many spell slots. What's nice about the Wizard is the fact that it gets the ability to learn spells that no one else can learn. So early in Act 1, there's a scroll that lets you summon Quasit, or shovel the Quasit. No one else can learn that permanently other than a wizard. So give it to your wizard. Don't waste it like I did my first playthrough. The wizard also can learn a few different, like Artistry of War, which is a unique spell in Act 3. Only the wizard is the only one that's able to cast that consistently, as well as Dethrone, which is another unique scroll. So any of the scrolls you find, give them to your wizard. He's the man with that. They use intelligence for their spell casting modifier, so that's what it's all about. I would say the wizard's maybe a little bit better than the fighter. It's up in the air between the monk. I think the monk's really powerful, but I think this is pretty accurate to where they're at. Sorcerer being the best, Bard just very slightly behind it. They're both fantastic classes. Cleric and Paladin, you could run a game with these four, and you're going to completely crush it. You can beat Baldur's Gate 3 with 4 rogues for that matter, but you're going to have the easiest time with these classes. I've tried out every single class. I've tried every single build. Well, not every single build, but most of them, and these are the strongest by far. Anything in the S and A tier is going to be fantastic, and even B tier. If you get into multi-classing, everything's viable. To be honest, 3 levels of rogue is probably one of the best multi-classes outside of like a single level dip in cleric or a 2 level dip in fighter. So there it is. Let me know in the comments what you think of this tier list of the classes in Baldur's Gate 3. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video fun, please hit the subscribe button below, and I'll see you all in the next video.